reentry journey, what would be one word to describe this journey?
Heartache.
Enriching.
Gratitude.
Unapologeticness.
Hope.
Elevating.
Passion.
Resilience.
I say transformation.
Determination.
Intention. My word is compassion.
Rebirth.
Intentional.
It's bigger than just walking down your probation and parole. It's changing your mindset, your lifestyle, and never returning to prison again. It's the reentry journey with Cardell Sims.
All right, man, we are back with another episode of the Reentry Journey. I am your host, Cardell Sims, and today's guest is doing a lot of work down there. I think we might know someone in common. I'll talk about that later on. I'll talk about that later on. But yeah, I'd like to welcome to the Reentry Journey our guest for today, Miss Cynthia Simons. Welcome to the Reentry Journey.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to having a thought-provoking conversation.
All right. So let the people know what area you're from. Where you from?
I live in Round Rock, but I am from the Austin, Texas area, in and around Austin, Texas.
Okay. And did you grow up in Austin?
I kind of, sort of. I was born in Dallas, Texas. And when I was very young, I moved to Bastrop, Texas. We originally came to Austin, but the school that I was going to have to go to was Dobie Middle School, which is still notorious for being one of the worst schools in Austin, Texas. So my parents moved us to a very rural community called Bastrop, Texas. And I went to high school there, and I graduated at the age of 15 years old. And I went off to attend college.
Wait a minute. You graduated at 15.
Yes.
Oh, you weren't doing no faking. How did we get to you graduating at 15? Like, what was the because this is what I'm thinking. You graduated 15-year-old, you're a brainiac. So if you're a brainiac, that means your parents stress education. Was that what it like inside the household with your parents?
No, actually, no.
Okay.
My parents, neither one of them graduated from college. My parents divorced. So I came from a single parent household. I read a lot. My mom did encourage reading, and I love to read and I love to write. So they were things that I was drawn to. I probably used them as a coping mechanism when I was young. So I was very engaged with literacy, literature, history. Those things were very intriguing to me. And I was always fueled by injustices. I was always standing up for someone, advocating for someone, bringing children into our home who were less fortunate. And I wanted to explore the law and know the law so I could argue with adults and win.
Oh, you wanted to argue with the adults. 15 years old, you graduate. What's next for you? Because 15.
Yeah, so I was still pretty young, and in hindsight, I wouldn't let my 15-year-old leave my house. So I graduated, but it was exciting for my family, for my mom, for me being able to get in college, as nobody in my family had ever been to college at this point. I think my dad had been maybe a semester and had left. So she moved me to San Antonio, and I started going to the University of Texas in San Antonio as a criminal justice pre-law major. And I did that for about a year and a half, but my mom had her own set of challenges in front of her and didn't necessarily have the tools to help me succeed at that time. So I was trying to figure out life and how to be an adult, still in a child's mentality, right? And the ability to only be able to develop so far because your brain is not fully developed yet. So, and I also, I think, dealt with trauma from the effects of my childhood. And because those things weren't processed in a healthy way, they were still showing up for me in the way that I was choosing relationships when I was on my own. So by the time I was 18, I was pregnant and I was dropping out of school to take care of my child.
And so, how were you feeling at that moment? You thrived on education. You graduated 15, still a child, but you're out on your own, and here you are, 18, and you pregnant. What was your feeling? What was your thoughts?
I was really disappointed in myself, and my mother was even more disappointed. So that most certainly did not help. I felt a lot of shame. And I think I compartmentalized what I was feeling because I went into survival mode. I knew how hard it had been for me to just take care of myself. And I had managed to, create some really good or take advantage of some really good opportunities when I was in college. I didn't have a vehicle, so I lived on campus, but I managed to secure a job for those apartments that I lived in, which afforded me the ability not to have to pay rent in exchange for my work. And I still got a monthly stipend that would take care of my groceries. I would work overnights and on weekends on call, so they would pay my light bill. So I managed to create a real balance in my work and personal life so that I could be hyper focused on my education. So I with this shift, with me becoming pregnant, I knew that I had to move into an apartment on my own, that I wouldn't be able to stay on campus anymore, or so I thought, because I didn't have any adults in my life trying to guide me and support me. I very well could have stayed on campus and probably could have had a lot of benefits with a child.
Right.
But I didn't know that. And I thought that me being pregnant meant that that was the end of me going to college. So I enrolled in a CNA program. And I moved off campus and I compartmentalized the things that I had felt related to the pregnancy, related to trauma from my childhood, to what I was currently going through, because I knew I needed to survive to take care of this little baby. And I was scared. And as a trauma response, I think I compartmentalized things and I did what I know to do in order to survive. And at that moment, that was work, work, work.
So you just work, and that was surviving. But did you use the work kind of as also, like you said, kind of like just to suffocate the trauma and the pain that, that you're going through it and those feelings and emotions?
Absolutely. I probably... Okay. In being able to reflect back, there was probably a lot of stuff that I did to keep myself busy so that I didn't have to sit with things that I had been experiencing or were currently experiencing.
And so how did you go from the CNA into doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so interesting journey. So I worked in the medical field for a while. By the time I was 21, I had 2 children. The father of my children has never been a financial support, emotional support, just hasn't been present for the children. So they were my responsibility 100%. A CNA making $12 an hour doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't pay your rent, your car note, insurance, gas, Pampers, diapers, wipes, milk.
They ain't even getting to the food for the. We ain't even talking about food yet.
Right. I wasn't even worried about me eating because that wasn't even something I could consider because I had so many other bills, so many other things I was trying to survive and take care of just to meet basic needs. So I began to engage in behaviors of survival. By the time that I was 22, I was in a relationship, which would be my relationship for the next 8 years. And my partner had a different lifestyle than I did, but it afforded me the opportunity to be able to take care of my children well. And at first, it was unbeknownst to me, but that wasn't always the case.
Right.
And
found you a hustler.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I don't
feel
know if
you.
I found him. I definitely feel like he found me,
He
but
found you. Yeah, yeah. That's how it goes. On that's how the hustlers be thinking. I've been there. I ain't gonna lie. You have to find me somebody in the medical field, like a little nurse or something. Yeah.
well, that's definitely what happens. And it was at the time I had just lost my car. Like there was just a lot of chaos going on, and I was happy to be able to buy my kids diapers without struggling. I was happy to be able to not come home and my lights be off. I was happy to not worry about how I was going to feed them, or not having the gas to take them to daycare so that I could go to work. So I overlooked a lot of things to take care of my family.
Mm. And when you overlooked a lot of things, um, would that lead to you yourself being involved and getting into any trouble?
Absolutely. So many, about 8 years later, things were coming to an end with us. I had experienced a lot of trauma, things that go along with the lifestyle, with the game. We had been
Mm.
robbed several times. We had good times. We had bad times. We had very unhealthy behaviors towards each other in being in a relationship. He had come from impoverished communities. He had come from a family where his father wasn't very present. His mother had died. So we both came from very dysfunctional families. So when we never learned how to fight fair, we never learned how to support each other in a relationship. I was very young. He was about 10 years older than me. So he like for sure thought he knew better than me. And
Oh yeah,
that for sure was like not going over with me.
yeah. He 10 years older. Ah,
Yeah.
yeah. He thought just coming from the mentality of somebody, coming from the streets who've been in that, had that mentality. Yeah, yeah. He thought he was gonna be able to. He knew more than you. He controlled you. He thought he had him a nice little leg in a sense.
Right. And things did not turn out that way. So it became very combative. And we had a tumultuous
He said, "Oh
last
no, hold on, this ain't what I thought."
no, we had a very tumultuous last 4 years. Police got called a lot. He, had different run-ins with law enforcement. So probably all of the police contact really brought the police more into our lives. It ended up being a abusive relationship towards the end, but I was financially dependent upon him. But I had learned a certain skill set that I could take care of myself, and so it took me about 2 years to be able to leave. We were in a small town. When the police would be called, I would never tell what was happening, so they were not for me. They were not in favor of me. And if I would call them to try to get my things, or be there so I could take my stuff out of the house, they wouldn't do it because I wouldn't tell on him when they would get called. And so it just became a really a dangerous situation that ended pretty violently, but it ended. And I went on to try to take care of my children and embark on a different lifestyle. Although I was taken care of, I had gotten older over this 8 year span. And what I was experiencing, what I was doing was not all that I wanted for my life. And I wanted to invest in myself. I wanted to invest in my education. I wanted to do something and show my children something other than selling drugs. So I went to an insurance school and I became a licensed insurance agent. But I had very little support with my children. He would call the police and do welfare checks because they would be at home for about an hour and a half by themselves. My son was 12, my daughter was 9. I didn't have any family support. So I attempted to move to Dallas where my family was to get that support. But before I could get to Dallas, some other issues occurred, and CPS got involved in my life and they removed my children.
Woo! From a man.
Yeah.
From that's crazy. And so this is kind of like another a pitfall, another fall, another obstacle that you face.
Absolutely. And
You,
it was intentional. You know, the abuse didn't stop just because I left him. Him calling
right.
the police and doing welfare checks, a form of abuse. Him consistently calling CPS because he knew what my children meant to me until they were removed was definitely a form of abuse. And he knew that it would break me, and it did. I was not actively trying to commit suicide, but I was not actively trying to live either. I had had my first child at 18 years old. That was my identity. I had changed my trajectory in life, what I stood for, what I believed in. And every day was about making sure that these kids were taken care of. So when you have a system that comes in and removes them and says, you're not fit to do this, well, who are you? Little girls are groomed, you know, from babies. You play with dolls and you act like you're the mom, and you're someone in your household teaches you how to cook, teaches you how to clean, because you are indoctrinated with this caretaking ability. So when that is stripped from you, it almost makes you feel subhuman. And so within a year, I was on probation. But after that year, I pulled myself back up and was like, okay, this isn't where I want to be either. I want to make some changes in my life. So at that time, I started working, going to my probation meetings, meeting those requirements, but still trying to fight to get custody back of my children. And they told me that as long as I was on probation, that they would never give me my children back, because I was at risk always for neglect, because at any moment I could be violated. And so
That's a collateral consequence of being on probation.
Yep.
I ain't even thinking about that. So because that you're on probation and they can violate you and send you to prison, send you to jail, you can't get your children back just because of the fact that you're on.
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
And they gave me a 4-year probation sentence. So I was like, by the time 4 years comes, one of my children will almost be grown. So I decided to not do the probation. It's not like they would just take it back. So I I didn't report for a while.
You bucked the probation. Man, what?
I didn't.
I ain't gonna get my kids back. You know what? Damn, forget this probation too.
Yeah, you can take the probation. I'm happy to go do my time, and then I'll come back and fight for them. So that's what I did essentially. And I thought I had a lot of shame, you know, from childhood on up, associated with the way that I processed my trauma, with the things that I had experienced, the things that I believed to be failures and to be all my fault, the relationship that I had engaged in and stayed in for almost a decade. I was a child that experienced abuse. So when I got into this almost decade-long relationship of abuse as an adult, I had a lot of like, how could you do this? How could you have possibly done the same thing that you experienced as a child? Why weren't you able to make better decisions? But I didn't understand trauma. I didn't understand the effects that it had on the brain. I didn't understand that I was still very much having trauma responses to things, and that none of it had been processed in a healthy way. And so when I went to jail and I went to prison, I realized very quickly that I was not an anomaly, and that I was a statistic. And in fact, there were lots of women with my same story, or even worse, that most women experience a large amount of trauma, that most women in prison, I think studies show that 81% of women incarcerated are mothers, but I go into the prisons and I teach programming, and I go in with a ministry group, and I try to pour into the women. And the first question I ask is, how many women in here are mothers? 98% of the room, the hands always go up. Interesting, but we know that, you know, data reflects what people intend for it to reflect.
Right.
So in that moment, I think that experience relit a fire inside of me, and me knowing that I was a statistic somehow empowered me, instead of ridding me with more shame. It somehow
Okay.
made me want to have a voice for myself and for others, and to be able to use the unique skills and gifts that God had given me to uplift and center our stories, and to make policy changes that would create more equitable outcomes for women and children.
Mm. And how did it make you feel when you got in prison and you realized that I ain't the only one that's going through the things that I went through and dealing with stuff that I'm dealing with?
It made me very sad. It made me very sad for our community and for our people. It was shameful when I had done it, but when I realized that the structural inequities and that the systems are set up for us, for women who look like me, for little girls who look like me, who grow up in impoverished communities, single parent homes, have been victims of or survivors of abuse, parents with substance abuse issues, all of these things, right? The intersectionality of education inequity, healthcare inequity, racial inequity, like all of these things culminated together, were designed for people who look like me to fail, for women like me to not be successful. And it saddened my heart that there were so many of us who never had a fair chance, and essentially have been a victim to the systems since, I don't know, we got here, slavery, inception of prison,
Right.
slavery.
Bad enough we ain't have a fair chance, but this is where kind of like where we landed at
Yeah.
for
And
not
yet
having
we
a.
don't
That's
realize
crazy.
it, right? We're that we don't actually have the correct history, the correct education for us to know what we're fighting up against. You're not
Mm.
fighting just to create a resume. You're not fighting just to get the job. You're not fighting just for what everybody else is fighting for. You're also fighting for equity in all of these spaces. You're also fighting to not be a statistic. You're also fighting to not be at the wrong place at the wrong time because of the color of your skin. You may be the one who is accused and convicted of the crime because of your background. If you are at the wrong place or at the wrong time, you will go back to prison. And these things were set up for us to fall in the crux of it, and they are our biggest oppressor. But we're not taught that. We're not taught how to fight against that. I wasn't taught that, and so many of the women around me were not taught that, and it made it easy for us to become victims of the systems.
Excuse me. I 100% agree. I always tell those in my class, when I go on the inside and teach, or even those that I might be mentoring on the inside or they come out and I mentor, I let them know like you have to create a system that combats their system. And they like, what you mean? And you broke it down clear as day, plain and perfect. Because a lot of people don't talk about that. Like this is like you said, you really have to create you a system that's going to combat the system that you're up against, and it's everywhere. That system is everywhere that you in everything that you're trying to get involved with, and it can threaten your freedom in at any moment, just because what's on your background and where you've been and where you come from. So I definitely understand that. What are some of the unique challenges incarcerated women face in maintaining connection with their children and their families?
Women do not get the same support that men do. Lots of times men have family members or girlfriends, people, from their community that consistently write them letters, bring their children to visit them, pay for phone calls, and do these things, although they're not great, but do these things that give them access to their loved ones and to be able to continue to nurture those relationships. Women have substantially less support. So there are less people writing letters. There are less people willing to bring the children to come visit them. There's only one program in the state of Texas. It's called GEM, Girls Embracing Mothers, that will bus children to go see their mother. It's not fully funded. It's not a national program. It's not a program that receives a lot of state, federal,
And it should be one of the programs that receives a lot of funding.
and
That's that makes me upset because me and you were both know in Texas there's probably several more than several reentry programs that's just getting the funding, but they ain't producing no results or they're not making an impact in any kind of way. So that and
Absolutely.
that funding should be going to something like that.
Yep, absolutely. So women have that, it's very challenging to foster that relationship while incarcerated. Most women had their rights terminated within a year of being incarcerated because they
And when you
most,
say rights, you mean parental rights?
yes,
Mm,
most women are the primary caretaker, and you obviously cannot complete a service plan or adhere to what CPS wants you to do while you're incarcerated. So most
right.
women get their rights terminated. I was able to fight for my possessory rights. I actually used them in my plea deal, which I don't know is totally lawful in my criminal case, but that is what happened. Um, I wrote a bill last session, the 86th legislative session, because when your rights were terminated in Texas, until this bill passed, there were no pathways back to reunification with your children. Texas
Mm.
incarcerates more women by sheer number than any other state. Texas is in a foster care crisis. The Texas Department of Family and Protective Services has been in an ongoing lawsuit for 5+ years
I was
about.
just about to ask what happens to the children in this process? They go right into foster care.
They go into foster care, or if there's a family member or relative that's willing to take them. But a lot of times they don't compensate them well. They give more money to a foster care group home than they will to a kinship caregiver. So people are not able to financially care for the children. And
Right.
there's such stringent rules on who can be a foster care placement and what your house has to look like and what standard of code it has to be up to, that a lot of people are disqualified based off of poverty.
Mm.
So children were languishing or are languishing in foster care. They're sleeping in hotels, they're being sex trafficked, they are having far worse outcomes. And data shows us that they are having far worse outcomes in foster care than they would have had if they stayed in the home, even if there was some neglect, even if there was some poverty happening. I'm not saying leave children who are being severely abused, but most times you could have taken a fraction of the resources that you are equipping the foster care homes with, that you are equipping these group homes with, that you are allocating to DFPS. You could have taken a fraction of those funds and you could have sustained that family. You could have given them help with rent. You could have child care assistance. You could have done job training so that the parent could make a livable wage, so that they could have a timeline where they would move off of any type of government assistance or assistance needed through the foster care program. A fraction of it could have been used. And we won't even talk about the money that you spent incarcerating the parent.
Right. Yeah. And they ain't got no problem spending that money. So are there any type of programs or policies that you know of that may have helped previously incarcerated women successfully reunite with their families after incarceration?
Well, I passed a bill that allows parents who had previously had their rights terminated to petition the court to be able to get their rights reinstated, and they can get their children back, provided that the child is not adopted, provided that the child is not the subject of an adoption suit. It's been 2 years since the date of termination, and they can substantially prove that they are a safe and stable home for the child. And you have to prove intent that the child is okay with going back. But there is a 6-month provision clause where the court can still have oversight, because typically parents would not have any access to their children once their rights have been terminated. So that 6-month
Okay.
clause is intended for the state to be able to pay for any services, any transitional or reunification services, any supervised visits, things that needed to occur so that the child can express the desire to want to go with parent.
Okay. And when you say 2 years after termination, that means after your rights been terminated, not after your probation or parole been terminated?
Right, 2 years after the date of involuntary termination.
Okay. Hmm. And what role does trauma play in incarceration? And like, how can a trauma-informed approach help preserve family bonds?
I think it makes all the difference. I think when we approach family relationships, family preservation and family reunification through a trauma-informed lens, we're looking to heal. We're looking to understand how people got to the places they are. We're looking to help unpack that and digest that in a healthy manner, instead of looking through it through a punitive lens of fit and unfit. Well, these people don't deserve this, or these people are doing this wrong. Instead of colonizing what families should look like, we should be meeting them where they're at. We have to have cultural competency. We have to understand that what may look like neglect to you is poverty to somebody else. And what may look like abuse to you is discipline to somebody else. And so there has to be this very holistic way of wrapping around the family in a trauma-informed, gender-responsive, age-appropriate way, where we are seeking to understand and find the best solution for the barrier or the problem or the conflict that exists in the family, instead of going in with this fit and unfit narrative and I know best, so I'm going to tell you how to parent your kids.
Right. Because that fit and unfit narrative, that's kind of like just a one shoe fits all. You either fit or you unfit. We ain't looking at the reasons behind it or anything else. What advice would you have for women who's trying to rebuild and repair those relationships once they get out of prison?
I would say to be patient. You miss your kids tremendously and you want to rush things, but part of being trauma informed is being able to receive and give that. It's reciprocal. So you have to be patient with these kids and you have to love them through the good, bad, and hard times. And sometimes that means accepting that the relationship is not going to happen when you would like it to, and being okay with that, keeping an open mind and an open heart. For when that relationship can be repaired, when there is an opportunity for rebuilding. Get yourself together, because it's going to come at a very spur of the moment, sporadic time. And when it comes, you need to be ready. You need to be able to help sustain that child, guide that child, and love that child through all of the things, and not have to tell them, wait, I'm going to follow, I need to, whatever, I need to go get an apartment, or I need to this, or I need to that. Do what you can do to get yourself ready for this baby to come home, because these children will come home. Even if they're 18, they're eventually going to come, and they still need the support. And most times parents have been, ostracized from communities and the caregivers that have their children. If you have rights, get in touch with legal aid, get in touch with nonprofit organizations that are doing legal advocacy, connecting you to attorneys to be able to exercise your rights, because those children need you just as much as you need them. But be prepared to be patient, be prepared for behavioral challenges, be prepared to love them through the things that society would cast them away for, because you're really the only one or the best person to do it. Other people may do it, but they're not going to do it with the same gentleness and the same patience that the biological mother is going to do. And in some cases, they're not going to do it. So find your children, because if you look at the aggregated data for the prison population and our foster care population, it looks the same. So they are incarcerating our kids in the foster care. They are dismantling our Black families at the same rate that they are dismantling and incarcerating Black people. That is intentional.
And then you look over the last 10 to 15 years, the spike in the incarceration of Black women as well.
Oh, yeah, it's over 500%. Categorically, the single Black mother has the highest likelihood to be incarcerated, but the least likelihood to receive any services from a state, local, or federal funded program. These are the programs that are intended to help the most oppressed, marginalized, and impoverished families, but they are the less likely to receive the services, because we go again through this narrative of fit and unfit. We have caseworkers, social workers, folks with their own implicit bias determining who gets these programs, who gets to be have these services, and there's no clear and concise eligibility guidelines, which is something that needs to change, because Black women are being discriminated against and they're not getting access to the programs and the services that were designed for people in their category, which is the most marginalized communities.
And so how can, let's say first with the prisons or institutions, how can institutions better support family reunification for incarcerated women?
I think you can start looking at alternatives to incarceration. I think you stop taking women out of the community, especially for nonviolent crimes, especially for drug offenses. I think that we reimagine what public safety looks like. I don't know that it is a harm to anybody but the person doing the drugs when we're sending people to state jail for possession of a controlled substance less than 1 gram. That has the highest rate of recidivism. So you're just cycling them in and out. There's no rehabilitation going on, and there is clearly a problem. We know now that addiction is a disease. So we're punishing people in some of the most inhumane conditions and then telling them to come out and be a productive member of the community. And now they are the collateral consequence of a felony conviction that bars you from livable wage paying jobs, that bars you from any apartment or regular rental. So I can't get a job. I can't find a place to live. You've taken my kids. I have a substance abuse issue, but I'm supposed to be a productive member of the community. You haven't given me the tools that I need to succeed. In fact, you have structurally set up the systems and put things in place so that I continue to fail. So I think we have to reimagine, policymakers, lawmakers, elected officials. We have to reimagine, what does public safety look like? And I think you start coming up with alternatives to incarceration. In Texas, I think we start having places for women and children to go. There's only 2 places in the state of Texas where a woman could come home and go to in a transitional home with her child. And the child has to be under 12 years old. So our most vulnerable population, the children who will not be adopted because of their age and behavioral issues, we have no place for them. There is no place that is conducive to a nurturing and thriving family environment with holistic wraparound services for women and children.
Oh, that's crazy. And you answered my next questions in a sense, because I was going to ask, what can the community or reentry programs do to support, family reunification in the community for formerly incarcerated women?
I think we come up with programs that are designed just for women and children. A lot of trauma therapy, a lot of reunification, the bonding between the relationship of the parent and the child. Child care services is a really, really big thing. Especially, it's one of your most expensive expenses outside of your rent or mortgage. Coming together to provide child care for women and childcare outside of your normal 8 to 5 hours. Most women who are formerly incarcerated don't get the luxury of working banker hours. You work the swing shift, you work the night shift. People have to have a safe and reliable place to take their children to. So I think that is something that we do. I think that reentry communities can also do professional development skills so that women can get into positions that they can work 9 to 5, so that they have more access to childcare, so that they get to be more intentional with their time that is at home with their children. And I also think bolstering up youth services programs. The woman is only as strong as what is happening in her house. And if her child is in dysfunction, if her child is in turmoil, she is in turmoil. If she has to leave work because of behavioral issues, time after time after time, she's going to be fired. She can't excel in that job to get a higher pay. So I think really bolstering up our youth services programs, youth mentoring programs, and really pouring a lot of money into that and taking a family-centered approach to reentry services and policy initiatives.
I like that. Y'all hear that? A family approach to reentry service. Most definitely. Dr. Sandra Smith. That's who we know. That's who we know. You know what? I need to get signed up for them peer support classes.
You
I keep
actually
missing it.
do.
Yeah, I need. No, I'm serious. I need them. Me and my business partner Aaron Smith. He from Chicago. Me and him. I've been telling. I said, man, we supposed to be getting in contact with Dr. Smith so we can get these get signed up for the class. We've been talking about that for like 3 or 4 months. We done missed the. I think it was a July deadline, and I think we just missed the October deadline. I got to get in
I
there
think
though.
October HRSA just opened up, so you might be in luck. You might be in
Yeah, I
luck
got to get in that.
with the program.
And what's that like helping those who've been through what we've been through get certified and become peer specialists? I didn't know how important it was until over the last few years when I really get locked in and got in the reentry field and started doing a lot of work. How it's important to really have that.
Absolutely. It's a monumental. It changes your life. There were a lot of people that probably tried to talk to me in different points of my life, but because they had not experienced what I experienced, I was not able to hear what they were saying to me. I'm not saying what they were saying was wrong, but I'm not saying it's right. But it didn't digest because you had not experienced what I have experienced. If you have not experienced abuse, if you have not experienced the lifestyle that I've experienced, then you cannot possibly tell me how to overcome it. And I think that's what's monumental about peer support is that whether you're talking about reentry, substance abuse, or mental health, the person that's talking to you has that lived experience. So it is a safe space. It is coming from a place of, hey, when I say I know how you feel, I really know how you feel. Right. And it's also instilling hope. Seeing is believing. You need to be able to see, touch, communicate with people who have experienced what you've experienced and are in success now, that their life is on an onward and upward trajectory because it instills hope in you. And it makes you believe that, hey, if this person can do it, I can do it. And I think that it's also a very different approach to how we have approached people with mental health issues or reentry, instead of talking at them or down to them, having somebody that's on the same level as them, someone that they can consider their peer, so that all of the defense mechanisms and the walls go down, so that you don't spend a year just trying to get through this person because of what they've experienced as, adverse childhood experiences, trauma as an adult, or feeling judged. These are people that have been disbarred and thrown away from community. So yes, there is some trauma there. Yes, there is some things that need to be worked through. But with peer support, it is a given that I'm not judging you. It is a given that I know that you are better than your worst mistake because I know I'm better than my worst mistake. And there's a comfortability level to be able to talk about children being removed or a drug addiction, because this person has experienced these things as well.
I definitely, I'm 1,000% agreeing with what you said about those who've been through it, being the ones to come back and being the peer specialist, because I talk about that and it's kind of what I stand for. Really, I fight for, especially on with the programmers on the inside, because I've been going through prison for a long time, in and out, and all the programs that was on the inside wasn't ran by successful former incarcerated people. And I'm just like you. What people was telling me didn't mean nothing. And, kind of what opened my eyes. I had to read books while incarcerated. Chef Jeff was like one of the first books I read as somebody who went through the prison system and got out and became successful. And so when I go back in with the programs, when I say on the inside, I also mean is having people like me and you as the educators and bringing the programs on the inside as well. Trying to change the narrative of the old programs. The reason why I know it was because when we were going on this tour, one of the biggest things that the people say on the surveys, those that attend the workshop, is actually coming from someone who's been through what they've been through, and we can all relate to each other. And it wasn't like we was telling them what to do. We was telling them about what we went through and the things that we had to overcome. And that's what connected them more to the workshop than anything else, the fact that we've been there. So I always say reentry looks like us now. And what I mean by that is those who've been through it and know what it really takes.
Yep, absolutely. Those who have been through it, those that can relate to them, those that can speak the language, there's a comfortability level. And I definitely think that system impacted people should be leading programming when you're talking about in prison, when you're talking about diversion programs, when you're talking about reentry programs, all of that. I think if we are not centering those with lived experience, then we're doing a grave injustice to the movement. Those two people, formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated people, have something, most of them have something in common, and that is that we have all fallen in the crux of structural inequities. And those are things that cannot be taught through academic books. Those are things that cannot be taught through a four-year institution, a PhD, a master's degree, any of those things. And those are things that have to be addressed in order to properly heal and in order to properly learn how to fight those things that we are fighting against that are invisible.
Exactly. So one more question before we go. I'll ask every guest that comes on the reentry journey. If you had one word to describe your journey, what would that one word be and why?
That's a good question. One word?
One word to describe this journey. What would that one word be and why?
Resistant.
And why resistant?
I have resisted everything through my entire journey, good things and bad things, and that has yielded me good and bad results. But there has been joy in my resistance, and there has been things that have been fruitful in my resistance, and my resistance against systems, oppression, and continuing to be complicit while we become statistics is what creates pathways for reunification for families, is what creates more equitable outcomes, is what energizes our younger generation to carry this movement forward and continue to fight this fight until we have equitable healthcare, education opportunities, work opportunities, until our families are no longer disproportionately dismantled and incarcerated.
And there you go. Well, Cynthia Simons, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being a part of the reentry journey, sharing your story and your knowledge and the work that you're doing. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. I love for us to connect. Possibly get down there with the tour, down to Texas with the tour, bring you on a couple of dates and come in with us and the team and let you do what you do best. How do the people, if they want to get in contact with you, how do they reach you?
They can reach me at either one of my jobs. I work at the Texas Center for Justice and Equity, and I also work at Via Hope, and I'm on LinkedIn, so they can also find me there, and I'm on Facebook.
All right, there you have it. This is another episode of the Reentry Journey. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. Thank you, Ms. Simons, for being the guest, and I appreciate you nothing but the best on your journey from here on forward. And continue to do the work that you're doing. Thank you for being in the guest on the reentry journey. For those of you tuned in, we are out. And you know what I always say, don't let the limitations of your background reduce the height of your potential. This is the reentry journey. Also, this episode is brought to you by, you already know, I'm So. Inspire, motivate, support others. Go to I'mSoNow.com, get your shirts, wristbands, socks. We got it all. Inspire, motivate, support others every day. We're out. The reentry journey. The reentry journey. What would be one word to describe this journey?
Heartache.
Enriching.
Gratitude.
Unapologeticness.
Hope.
Elevating.
Passion.
Resilience.
Consistency. I say transformation.
Determination.
Intention. My word is compassion.
Rebirth.
Intentional.
It's bigger than just walking down your probation and parole. It's changing your mindset, your lifestyle, and never returning to prison again.